If you suffer from anxiety or depression, where are you likely to look for help? Maybe you'll tell a friend or a family member, or maybe you'll tell a counselor. But what about the church? Where would a pastor fit into the list of people that you might reach out to? Or your small group leader? Maybe the thought of bringing this up to your church community seems perfectly natural, but my hunch is that for a lot of people, the church would be pretty low on the list of people that you might turn to. Maybe you can't fully articulate why this is. Maybe you just feel a bit of skepticism that they would have anything helpful to say. Or maybe you've actually had a negative experience trying to talk about your depression or anxiety with the church. Maybe you've shared what you were going through and you were met with silence or shame, or someone just saying, "I'll pray for you," even though you think they probably had no intention of actually doing that. And if that is you, you are not alone. Christianity Today is a popular Christian magazine, and they ran an article in 2018 with this as the subtitle: "Why is it uniquely challenging for us to address issues often associated with mental illness?" The us in that sentence is referring to the church. The church hasn't done the best job of serving people who battle mental illness, and that's to put it lightly. If church leadership is any indication of how the people in the church are acting, then it's very telling that in that same article, a study found that nearly half of Protestant pastors rarely or never speak on the subject to their churches in sermons. Now, I do think that churches are maybe starting to buck this trend a little bit. I saw more churches preaching about mental health during the beginning months of COVID-19 than I probably have in my entire life. But in general, this topic doesn't get nearly as much airtime as other topics in the Bible. Only 7% of pastors talk about mental health at least once a month. And for lots of people in church congregations, it's a real and ongoing reality, much bigger than 7%. John Hopkins puts the stat at 26%, or 1 in 4 adults 18 or older who suffer from a mental illness in a given year. So if it is so common, then why are churches so hesitant to talk about it? Why isn't this a major theme of our ongoing care? Frankly, why aren't we doing a better job of helping people who are clearly hurting? In the Bible, there's lots of people who battle mental illness. Read the Psalms. Jeremiah, he was known as the weeping prophet. Paul talks about his battles with crippling anxiety. Jesus himself is referred to as the man of sorrows. So why aren't we bringing it up more? I think that there are 3 main reasons that churches and Christians are doing way worse than they should be in this area. Here's the first one. Christians are much better with short-term crises than chronic issues. Now, Protestant churches, and that's what my personal experience is mostly with, this is not speaking to Catholic churches or even denominational churches. I've mostly been in non-denominational churches in my life. They often take a very pragmatic approach when it comes to ministry. Let me give you an example. When I lived in the city of Chicago, the church that I worked for was across the street from Cabrini Green, which is a very low-income public housing project. A new school had just opened up in the neighborhood, part of this merger, and so we rallied tons of people to come and help clear out classrooms, paint the school, and our people came out in droves. We knuckled down, and we got most of it done in a few days. Cross that off the list, God is good. But several of us on staff, we felt like we wanted to have a way to have some sort of ongoing relationship, an ongoing way that we could serve the community that went deeper than just these more surface level renovations. There was a woman in our church named Ruth. She had been deeply embedded in the neighborhood for decades. She knew all the people, the families by name. She was loved and adored by basically everyone. And when there was a shooting related to gang violence, which happened unfortunately pretty often, she would often know about it before the police knew about it. And we asked her, what should we do to better care for the community? And she basically said, it's simple. Start coming in and making relationships. But it will probably take years for the trust to build up enough for you to actually make an impact. And then I saw some of our people's eyes literally glaze over. Years? Isn't there a way that we could knock this out over a weekend? Even though this picture is not about mental health, I think it perfectly illustrates how we as Christians are completely inept at dealing with long-term chronic issues. With mental health, it's exactly the same. We are so unbelievably pragmatic that long-term chronic mental illness is simply too depressing for us to deal with. Think about it. If someone tells you that they suffer from a chronic mental illness, you might pause before saying, "I'll pray for you." Because are you really willing to commit to praying for this person for the rest of your life? Because a lot of these issues will be there for life. Doesn't it seem like a waste of time to pray for something like this? I'm not saying that this is right. I think it is absolutely awful. But it is a reality. It is much easier to focus on doing a meal train for the person who just got surgery that's going to solve surgery that it solved like an acute issue than it is to help someone long term. Because after the person in surgery recovers, we won't have to think about it anymore. Now, the second reason that we are so bad at addressing mental health as a church is this. There is a very real stigma attached to mental illness in churches. Someone wrote this in an article, and the sentiment should feel pretty familiar. When someone came home from having knee surgery, half of the church brought food and sent cards. When my husband came home from the hospital after a suicide attempt, our fridge stayed its usual empty. This isn't just an anomaly of just one random person. There's a pastor named Rick Warren at this massive church in California called Saddleback. After his son committed suicide, he said this to his congregation. He said, "There is no shame in diabetes. There is no shame in high blood pressure. But why is it if our brains stop working, there's supposed to be shame in that?" I hate, as much as I hate to admit it, many of us in church have a very backwards understanding of what mental illness actually is. People with depression are told to be more joyful. At some point, someone came up with the absurd idea that if someone commits suicide, they automatically go to hell, which is something that's literally found nowhere in the Bible. And for many people, mental illness can be seen as connecting to some sort of underlying sin issue. Some Christians even associate it with demon possession. And so you get people hiding issues that greatly affect their lives from the very community that's supposed to be able to be open and honest with them to help them through it. The church is supposed to be like a family, but unfortunately, like many earthly families, there are a lot of topics that just simply aren't allowed on the table. Now, the third reason is where I want to camp out for the rest of our time. And it's this. We are confused by the relationship of our bodies, our minds, and the role of the Holy Spirit. This reason probably doesn't give you that same gut response as the first two, but I think if we could fix this, it would help put everything else in place. Now, think about it. What happens when people become Christians? We believe that God brings them from a state of spiritual deadness to a new state of spiritual life. We're given a brand new spirit that can follow God and serve Jesus. We find ourselves with new purpose and mission in life. We're reconciled with God. We're adopted into his family. We're saved. You know, all these very Christian sounding terms. But notice what didn't happen when we became Christians. If we had a broken leg, it was probably still broken after we became a Christian. If we had a bad back, it was probably still bad after beginning to follow Jesus. Of course, we've heard stories of people receiving some type of miraculous healing when they become Christians, but these are by far the exception. Most people who have physical pains still have them even after they become Christians. So even though we're inwardly transformed, our bodies are still broken, aging, and dying. And as we become more like Jesus, more generous, or more loving, or more peaceful, we're often getting older, more achy, and wrinkly. This is why so many Christians look forward to heaven, because they believe that they can get out of these messed up bodies and go to be with God. We think it's going to be so much better when I don't have to be stuck in this dying, aging body. Now pause for a second. Do you see what we have done? We have made a nice, clean separation between the mind and the body. Or to put it in more spiritual terms, we've separated body and soul. The body is the realm of physical issues like a bad back or bad knees, and the soul is the realm of issues related to sin. I'm telling you, this is how we think about it in our minds. Things like jealousy, lust, hatred. In our minds, these all need to be dealt with at the brain or soul level. And so when we become Christians, we believe, God's beginning to work on us at that soul level, but not on the physical level, right? You never hear people say, become a Christian so that God will get rid of your arthritis. We say, become a Christian so that God can get rid of your sin and make you more like Jesus. And here's where we start to fall into problems. Because what category does mental illness fall into? For most of us, it is part of the mind part of the equation, part of the soul part of the equation, which means that to us, unfortunately, it is more closely tied to sin than to some type of physical problem. And so we deal with mental illness like we deal with most sin issues. Are you suffering from depression? Then read these verses about having more joy. Start praying that God would fill you with his joy. If you are suffering from anxiety, here's a verse that says, do not be anxious about anything. Here's a good meme that I've seen posted about this, and I think it kind of sums up the way that we deal with it. Now, while we have good intentions when we do or say these types of things, we often set ourselves up to fail the people in our churches. Because what happens when the depression doesn't go away? What happens when the anxiety remains? We can only send them so many motivational Christian pictures on Instagram. And then we start to think maybe the reason they're not getting better is because they're failing to believe these biblical truths. Maybe they aren't praying enough. Maybe they don't have enough faith. And you see the slippery slope that we've gone down? Do you see where the stigmas come from? Do you see why people don't want to share about their issues openly? But what if we've been thinking about this wrong? What if we need to back up to that nice clean division we made between mind and body? Now, the way that many Christians think about the division between our minds and our bodies is actually more influenced by philosophy outside of Christianity than it is by the Bible. Plato was an ancient philosopher who taught that the physical world was evil and a cheap imitation of a true and better reality, which exists in the immaterial world of the soul. The idea of the body being bad and the soul or our minds being good has greatly influenced our modern understanding of these categories. It's why so many Christians talk about how good it will be to go to heaven someday and leave this broken and messed up world. And even more recently, many of us have adopted that idea from Descartes, the philosopher from, remember learning about him in high school. He's the guy who says, I think, therefore I am. And so we take that I think, therefore I am, that mind looking down at the body, and we adopt that separation between our minds and our bodies. But this is not how Jesus or Paul would have viewed the mind and the body. The mind and the body for them was one whole unit, and the whole unit was affected by sin and needed redeeming by God. Modern science backs this up. We know that so much of mental illness results from physical problems in how the brain is wired. And if you're not sold on that idea, I encourage you to do some research because you'll see it's kind of the consensus. But even just common sense backs this up. Everyone knows that what you think is going to affect what you do. If you're angry, like in your mind, you'll maybe yell or hit someone, right? You take that mind idea and externalize it with your body. But what's less obvious is that what you do also affects what you think. It goes in both directions. If you stay up too late and you don't get a lot of sleep, your thought patterns will be completely different the next day. You'll be much more likely to be short with other people and to be more pessimistic. You aren't a mind and a body, two separate entities. You are a whole person who is made in the image of God. Now, how does this change how we think about mental illness? We need to realize that when someone struggles with mental illness, we need to deal with it as a church, not just on a spiritual level, but on a physical level also. We need to encourage Christians to get therapy and to take medication when necessary. We need to deal with it at the soul level and our physical level. Now, how do I know that this is the way that we should go about it? Because it's the way that Jesus goes about it. Jesus explains his mission in Luke chapter 4. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim to the captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come." He is not only referring to physical captivity or physical oppression. This includes those who feel captive or oppressed by their mental illness. And while this freedom has begun today in our lives, it's not going to be fully completed until Jesus returns. The true biblical picture of the end of the world is not some clouds in the sky going away to heaven. It's Jesus returning and redeeming all of creation. He's not coming back to destroy everything and take the Christians away, which is what some Christians think. He's going to come back and bring heaven to earth. And in the process, we will be given brand new bodies that don't suffer from either broken legs or any type of mental illness. Now, Paul, he describes it this way. "What I am saying, dear brothers and sisters, is that our physical bodies cannot inherit the kingdom of God. These dying bodies cannot inherit what will last forever. But let me reveal to you a wonderful secret. We will not all die, but we will all be transformed. It will happen in a moment, in the blink of an eye, when the last trumpet is blown. For when the trumpet sounds, those who have died will be raised to live forever. And we who are living will also be transformed. For our dying bodies must be transformed into bodies that will never die. Our mortal bodies must be transformed into immortal bodies. This is Paul talking about the ultimate hope of humanity. Lots of Christians don't even know that our ultimate hope is not to go live in this cloud somewhere as a disembodied spirit. It is to have a renewed body and to live in a fully redeemed, renewed world. And that new body includes not just new legs and new arms, doesn't have arthritis and things like that, but it actually is a fully renewed brain, one that will never suffer from any type of mental illness.